Absolutely amazing fight in our main event of UFC 266. Welcome to Fight Night Picks. As always, one half your host and duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, Matt Allen on the respective socials at Matt Allen FNP. And I know we've been so excited for this fight to finally happen for the featherweight strap. And it's unfortunate, maybe somebody wants Max Holloway in the mix. He'll have a fun fight coming up in the not so distant future. But for both of these guys, Brian Ortega has grown leaps and bounds between fights. And if you look at it through his early UFC tenure, but not just early UFC tenure, just about every fight Brian Ortega's been in, he's been outstruck. And in his last fight, he outstruck the Korean Zombie, one of the better guys with the hands in the division. You love to see it. And for Alexander Volkanovski, a guy that kind of got to the dance with his wrestling, then abandoned it for his hands and continued to get better, he was able to outstruck or at least parry and counter with some of the great strikes from an all-time great at featherweight, and I'm not afraid to say it, in Max Holloway. So for Volkanovski, an amazing run. For Ortega, an amazing comeback off the loss to Holloway, where a lot of people wondered, how's he even going to come back, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%. He ate an ungodly amount of damage in that fight, but after breaking his hand and cutting his hair and taking about 2 years away from the cage, he looked better than ever against the Korean Zombie, and I can be very honest about this. I completely counted him out in that fight. I thought Zombie was going to have his way with Brian Ortega, because up until that fight, yeah, Brian Ortega offensively is a great fighter, but even go back to the Clay Guida fight. If Clay Guida can drop you, the Korean Zombie can knock you out, and that's just, I don't make the rules again, guys. That's just how they are. Brian Ortega finally showed another evolution in his striking game, though, and it was really nice to see that he actually put in the work during his time off, because we've seen this of a lot of fighters. They take 1 year off, 2 years off, and they come back, and yeah, they might come back at about the same level that we saw them when they first left, but if you're not making use of that time, why'd you take it off to begin with? And for Brian Ortega, he actually looked like he did make good improvements with his striking, and I don't know if that has to do with the fact that he has switched up his camp quite a bit since the Holloway fight. I know before that Holloway fight, this is on me. I can't remember the name of his boxing coach leading up to that fight, but I remember every camera that was near Brian Ortega, this guy made sure it was on him too. And it was a lot of, oh, me, Henner, and Brian, and oh, me, Henner, and Brian. That guy doesn't seem to be in the equation right now, and again, I don't want to say, oh, it was just his fault, but we've seen Brian Ortega's striking make a big leap since he has at least more personalized his camp, and that's the thing I do like about Brian Ortega. It's hard to pin down just where does Brian Ortega train. It's not like he's someone who's with an American top team, where it's like, okay, I go to this one gym, and they have everything I need. Brian Ortega kind of has his own personal team around him, and that's something I really like. The first fighter that ever did this, and I always think about this, is George St. Pierre, of course, because GSP had John Danaher, Faraz Zahabi, and
Freddie
Roach, and Jackson Wink. So he basically had all the corners of the MMA world covered for his personal game. And it seems like Brian Ortega has at least started to branch out and just start figuring out, okay, how can I be my best self instead of, okay, which gym will I fit in the best with?
And if you look at it for Ortega, he was one of those guys that was such a primary grappler, similar to a Naaman Gracie that we saw this weekend go out there against Mark Lemminger, who can strike, and he looked like, I don't know, a Phoenix Rising.
Bangkok ready.
Like an Invicta Phoenix Rising. But yeah, Naaman just walked ahead, throwing hammers, and knocks him out. So for Ortega, now all of a sudden, that seems to be a tool that he has in his tool belt. And against a guy like Volkanovski, you can't be one-dimensional at all, because Volkanovski is so well-rounded that there's so many different versions of him that he can throw out there. And he can beat you at your own game, like when he fought our guy, Junior Bacon Cheeseburger, Jeremy Kennedy, and he ripped his soul out of his body. What did you make of that one?
That was a filthy fight, because JBC's pretty good everywhere. It's like he's a good wrestler, he has good jiu-jitsu, he has good striking, he has wins via all different ways on his tapology. Alexander Volkanovski Khabib'd him, though, and that's the only way that I can say it. Like, he took him down, held him down with that wrist control, and just threw hammers at him from the top position, and that's where this fight gets really interesting, because on the feet, I think Alexander Volkanovski at least has more weapons on the feet. He throws the leg kick with both legs. He can switch stances pretty much seamlessly between the two. And that's the thing about Volkanovski. Yes, he might not be as flashy as some of the other strikers at 145 pounds, but that doesn't mean that he's not as effective with his strikes. He's a very defensively sound fighter, and he's just a fighter who doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Craig, how many times do we sit here and look at a fighter's record or resume, and it's, oh, they made a mistake in this fight, and that's why they lost?
Curtis Blades.
Exactly. They zigged when they should have zagged. Alexander Volkanovski doesn't really have that problem. We talk about fight IQ when we talk about a guy like Cyril Gane, but Cyril Gane fights a lot like Alexander Volkanovski. The big difference is that if Cyril Gane doesn't have things going on the feet, which hasn't happened yet, so maybe it never will, he doesn't really have the pure wrestling chops to just go out there and chain a single leg with a double leg and figure out a way to get you to the ground. He has good wrestling, but this video isn't about Cyril Gane. With Alexander Volkanovski, he's shown that when things aren't going his way on the feet, he can go to the clinch, get you up against the cage, dirty box with you, drag you to the ground. He's such a well-rounded mixed martial artist that it's going to be difficult for any fighter he's in there with to just go out there and beat him in one aspect. For Brian Ortega, listen, Ortega has the better jiu-jitsu in this matchup, and I don't think anybody would argue that with you. Here's the question, though, that I have for you. If Alexander Volkanovski is on top of Brian Ortega, do you think he can hold that position confidently and safely? Or do you think Volkanovski will use his wrestling kind of like Cowboy Cerrone did against Nate Diaz, where it's, I'm just going to dump you. I'm just going to dump you to make you work and get back up to your feet, and I'm not going to play around in the grappling at all?
I think that it's going to be telling, if you look at it from Volkanovski's last fight against Max Holloway, again, another very controversial close fight. But what happened near the end of that? Now, Holloway is a volume striker. He can pick you apart from the outside. He can do great work on the inside.
Ask Brian Ortega.
Volkanovski started to wrestle near the end of that. Had some success. Holloway did pop back up, but still had some success with it. Do you want to see Volkanovski do that against Ortega? I don't. That's how you get stuck into like a Nick Lenz guillotine.
You're 100% right, but you don't become a fighter like Alexander Volkanovski and get to a title shot because you put your head in bad positions. The only reason I bring this up is, look at Thiago Tavares, for instance. Like, Thiago Tavares spent minutes in top position on Brian Ortega. And yeah, Ortega off his back did a good job with his hammer fist, oddly enough, but he has been a fighter who's been able to get held down in the past. A lot of Ortega's wins come in that third round, and for the longest time, he was known as the comeback king. Like, that was Brian Ortega's thing.
Moicano fight.
Exactly. You beat me up for 2 rounds, then I submit you in the third. And it's a pretty great deal when you're a guy like Brian Ortega. But I do think that against Volkanovski might be able to have some success with his ground and pound in this fight. The area I don't want Volkanovski in is in that clinch control situation, because Brian Ortega has one position where he might be the best in the whole UFC with. When you duck for a takedown and he tries to reach over that guillotine up against the cage, I don't care who you are. You could be Damian Maia himself and you would have a hard time getting out of that guillotine, because just the way Ortega's arms are, he's long for the division, like everything works together perfectly. And he's someone who, when you're in those in-betweens, he's looking for submissions, and that's the area I think he could catch Volkanovski in.
I think of Brian Ortega in my mind's eye as this great big guy for 135. Only a couple inches
45.
taller than Volkanovski, and he actually has less reach than Volkanovski at 145. Of course, Volkanovski, through his UFC tenure, one bonus, a fight of the night against Chad Mendes. Brian Ortega, it just goes on and on. Fight of the night against Holloway. Performance bonus over Edgar. Performance and fight of the night with Cub Swanson. Fight of the night with Renato Moicano. Fight of the night with Thiago Tavares. It's insane the bonus money this guy has earned. And now, just to go with the fact that he has the money, he has the success, he has Tracy Cortez kind of in his corner. I mean, just everything's going great for old Brian Ortega. Everything's looking up for old Ortega. Now he has a big test in front of him in Volkanovski. And the last time that he challenged for the belt, it really didn't go his way. So, Matt, when I look at the odds for this one, Volkanovski open minus 185 favorite. He's roughly a minus 171. Again, best fight odds for Ortega, plus 160. Now at a plus 142. Topology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you. And 1,052 of them, roughly 71% Volkanovski, 80% by decision for the 29% that have Ortega, 55% by submission. Is it going to be and new? Is it going to be and still?
So the reason I brought up I just said the word mistakes a lot in this fight is because Brian Ortega throughout his career has capitalized on the smallest mistakes his opponents have made really throughout his whole career. It's been a lot of those Hail Mary third round stoppages via knockout and by submission. It's really hard to get a Hail Mary win against a guy who doesn't make a lot of mistakes to begin with. And that's what I look at when I look at a fighter like Alexander Volkanovski. He's oddly compact for this division, so it's going to be really hard to go out there and get a takedown on him because he just has such a low center of gravity. And B, I'm pretty sure Alexander Volkanovski is the most physically strong guy in this division. I know that's not something we talk about a lot when it comes to MMA. We like to talk about the wrestling or the striking a lot more, but I do not think Brian Ortega can take down Alexander Volkanovski. I think Alexander Volkanovski can take down Brian Ortega all day long, and that's where I have to side with Volkanovski. He has that plan B to where, okay, if things aren't going great on the feet, maybe I don't want to be grappling with Brian Ortega, but at least let me try to get some of my ground and pound off, give this fight a different look. For Brian Ortega, if he's getting beat up on the feet, he can pull guard a few times, but I don't think he can go out there and just get a takedown for takedown's sake against a guy like Volkanovski, and I think he needs one to win this fight.
Brian Ortega did awful on The Ultimate Fighter. His picks were bad. So bad, and if you look at it, it was The Ultimate Fighter, Ricky Tercios. I mean, yeah, Brian Battle's pretty good, but forget about the rest of the guys. Volkanovski did a great job there from a coaching perspective. Who had Craig Jones?
Alexander Volkanovski.
Yeah, exactly. So many great coaches for Volkanovski. And Ortega had a good lineup as well, but ultimately didn't fare all that well for him. He has a great opportunity to capitalize on not just that, but also, I mean, listen, the guy loses to Holloway in emphatic fashion, comes back and puts on, I'd say, a career performance against Korean Zombie.
But this is what I will say about that fight. He capitalized on a mistake that the Zombie did. Zombie crashes forward a lot. And if you even go back and watch the Yair Rodriguez fight, how does Yair stop him? Spinning elbow that he doesn't see coming because he crashes forward. Brian Ortega has a good spinning elbow. He threw it against Max Holloway. It just didn't land like it did against the Korean Zombie. And against Zombie, he hits it with him early in the fight. Second round's over. To me, and listen, if you're out there and you're a big Brian Ortega guy, you could argue against this, but I just felt like that was a Zombie who was wobbled, and we never really saw a good version of him for the third, fourth, and fifth round.
Which he said himself.
Exactly. Now, again, if you lose really bad, of course you're going to make excuses, but again, to me, that performance came down to Ortega's ability to capitalize on a mistake of the Korean Zombie, and I just keep on going back to, other than one overhand right that Alexander Volkanovski walked into from Chad Mendez, who normally flatlines guys when he lands that punch, he really hasn't made a lot of mistakes throughout his UFC career, and he's been able to be in there with guys like Max Holloway and Jose Aldo and barely even break a sweat against them. Now, yes, those Holloway fights were very close, and he did get hit with some clean shots, but I don't think Brian Ortega is the technician that Max Holloway is in the feet.
Strike differentials for these guys. 6.02 strikes landed per minute. That's significant strikes landed per minute for Volkanovski to 3.31. That's an uber positive strike differential. For Brian Ortega, 4.29 to 6.28. That is a bad and a giant negative that's also weighted by the Holloway fight. But you got to remember, Brian Ortega's strike splits are bad throughout his UFC career. He got outstruck by Holloway. Just about everybody, really. I mean, I go down through this list. I mean, Holloway, Swanson outstruck him. Moicano outstruck him. Guida, they were tied. Diego Barandao outstruck him. He outstruck Tavares. Even Mike Della Torre outstruck him. So, again, you look at the way that the fights ended. Ortega's won every single fight except for the Holloway fight. But I do like the well-roundedness of Volkanovski in this one. I see it as very close. I wouldn't be surprised if those odds end up like Volkanovski minus 130, minus 135, and maybe then you take a shot either way. But I like Volkanovski for the well-roundedness here.
If Ortega gets the win, it's going to be by one of those crazy submissions like he did against Cub Swanson. Like
Or Moicano.
It's not going to be a traditional, like, oh, I'm going to slowly work my way to the back of Volkanovski and then get him with a rear naked choke. I think Volkanovski's defensive grappling is a little bit too good for something like that to happen. But on one of those in-betweens, like, let's say Volkanovski does get hit by a big shot and he does decide to go for an ill-timed takedown. Brian Ortega is basically a Gracie. I know people have a hard time wrapping their head around that, but he basically, like...
He's Henner's brother.
Henner almost borderline adopted him when he was a young adult, and he's lived and been with Henner Gracie for a decade now. Like, his jiu-jitsu is better than almost anybody in the whole UFC, much less just this division. So if he wins, it'll probably be by sub, but I still like Volkanovski.
Both of us going with Australia's own Alexander Volkanovski to get the win. I cannot wait for this fight. And listen, if you can't get enough of Fight Night Picks, make sure you subscribe and toss a like. We get to 30,000. And listen, there was a big jump last week to get us up closer, but we can go from 27 to 30,000 just like that.
Tell a friend.
You can make it happen. So tell a friend. We'll add a new show to the lineup. People want that Dana White's Contender Series content, among other things. And if you can't get enough of us talking about sports, make sure you check us out. 15-minute card breaks. I got a Trevor Lawrence autographed Alan Ginter. I've got a Randy Arozarena autograph as well. There's a story between everything and behind everything. So check us out down below. 15-minute card breaks. Matt, I can't wait for this weekend. We have question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims, so we get a chance to look at the weigh-ins. Maybe we
see if Dan Hooker makes weight on insanely short notice.
We're really kind of tight on some of these picks. We have a switch of thinking. I went Kutsalaba last weekend instead of Devin Clark, and it paid off for me. So we'll check that one out 2 hours before the prelims, and also the Fight Night Picks Fight Companion. You can check that out. Maybe you don't want to listen to the commentary. Maybe you don't want to listen to The Sting. He's out there doing one of those too. Maybe you want to check us out. You can find us on the Fight Companion. We'll drop the thumbnail and all the information as the week goes on. I can't wait for this card. It's an awesome one. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.